You know, it's getting kind of hard to ignore all the cybersecurity stuff in the news these days. Seems like every time you turn around, there's a new attack, new breach. It's enough to make anyone nervous, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to keep up with.
So for this deep dive, we're going to try to cut through the noise and focus on what really matters when it comes to staying safe online. We'll unpack some of the most significant cyber threats, look at who's behind them, and give you some practical steps you can take to protect yourself. We've got reports on some pretty high-profile breaches this week, analyses of evolving tactics. We'll even take a look at the financial fallout from these attacks.
Should be interesting.
Yeah, no doubt.
Hmm?
So let's jump right in with, well, this one hits close to home for a lot of people. American Water, the largest water utility in the U.S.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Well, they recently had to take several of their systems offline because of a cyber attack. Customer portals, billing services, all down.
Really? Everything.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a scary thought, isn't it? Turning on the tap and hoping some hacker isn't messing with your water supply.
It really is. And what's even more concerning is that this isn't an isolated incident. We've been seeing an uptick in attacks on critical infrastructure, not just in the U.S., but globally.
Right, like that recent attack on the Irish healthcare system.
Exactly. And these attacks are becoming more sophisticated and more frequent. The Water Information Sharing and Analysis Center, Water ISAC, they've been issuing warnings about this for a while now, urging better cybersecurity measures.
Yeah.
The EPA, too.
Yeah, and it's not just our water systems that are at risk. I mean, think about our communication networks. AT&T and Verizon, two giants in the industry, were also targeted by hackers recently.
No, really?
Yeah, and this wasn't just some random kids in a basement. This was a highly organized group known as Salt Typhoon.
Salt Typhoon. Haven't heard that one before.
Yeah, they're relatively new on the scene, but they've already made quite a name for themselves.
So what were they after?
Well, get this. They were trying to gain access to systems used for government wiretapping.
You're kidding. Espionage, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, talk about high stakes. It seems like the digital bad guys are up in their game, going straight for the jugular.
They are. And what we're seeing is a shift in tactics. These advanced persistent threat groups, or APTs, they're incredibly patient, very sophisticated. We're talking custom-built malware, advanced techniques to infiltrate even air-gapped systems.
Air-gapped, what's that?
Basically, it means a system that's completely isolated from the internet, no direct connection at all, like having a computer that's never been online.
So how do they even get in?
It takes a lot of planning, a lot of patience. Sometimes they'll use things like infected USB drives, physically brought into a secure location. Other times it might be a compromised device on the same network, even if it's not directly connected.
So even if you're super careful, there's still a chance.
Unfortunately, yeah, there's always some risk. But these APT groups, they usually go after high-value targets, governments, critical infrastructure, corporations with valuable data.
Like AT&T and Verizon, you said.
Exactly. And these groups, they're often well-funded, highly skilled, they know what they're doing.
It's kind of scary, honestly.
Yeah.
And I bet they're only going to get more sophisticated.
I think that's a given. But on that note, you mentioned corporations with valuable data. We can't forget about what happened to Universal Music Group recently.
Oh man, that was a mess.
Names, social security numbers, addresses, all kinds of personal information just out there. Over 680 people from Maine alone had their information compromised.
Yeah, that was big news here. A lot of people I know were affected.
It just goes to show it can happen to anyone. No one is immune.
So what can people do, besides just panic?
Well, first of all, don't panic. There are steps you can take. But that's a whole other conversation, and probably a good place to pick up in our next installment.
So, where were we? Oh yeah, trying not to freak out about all this cybercrime stuff. But before we all chuck our phones into the ocean and move to a remote cabin in the woods, let's talk about solutions.
Right, because that's totally practical for most of us.
True. But seriously, what can people actually do to protect themselves?
Well, sometimes the weakest link isn't some complex code or high-tech system. It's us. Human error. You remember we talked about that EigenLayer hack earlier?
Yeah, that one was crazy. They lost, what, millions?
$5.7 million. And it wasn't some sophisticated exploit or anything. It was a compromised email. Someone managed to intercept a conversation about a token transfer, redirected the funds right into their own pocket.
Wow. So even in the world of crypto and blockchain, it can be as simple as falling for a phishing scam?
Pretty much. Highlights why that basic cybersecurity stuff is so important. Strong passwords, two-factor authentication, thinking twice before you click on a link. It's not sexy, but it works.
It's like the foundation, right?
Yeah.
Before you can worry about the fancy security system, you got to make sure the doors and windows are locked.
Exactly. But speaking of the more technical stuff, there have been a few vulnerabilities making the rounds lately that are, well, a little concerning.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
There's one that really underscores how interconnected our digital world is, how even something that seems pretty obscure can have a ripple effect.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
So, you ever heard of Apache Avro?
Can't say I have. Should I have?
Probably not. It's a system used for something called data serialization. Basically, it's like taking a bunch of information and packaging it up so it can be sent to another system.
So like the digital equivalent of putting something in a box and shipping it off.
Exactly. And Apache Avro is used a lot, especially for large data sets. Problem is, there was a flaw in it, a security hole. And it could allow an attacker to basically execute code on a vulnerable system.
Oh, no. That's not good. So like sneak something nasty into that digital package.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thankfully, the vulnerability has been patched, but it's a good reminder that even the stuff we don't see, the stuff happening behind the scenes, it can all be vulnerable.
It's like you can have the best security system in the world for your house, but if there's a weak spot in the foundation, the whole thing can crumble.
Right. And I think for a lot of companies, trying to keep up with all these vulnerabilities, all these potential threats, it can be overwhelming.
I bet. It's like
Yeah.
a never-ending game of whack-a-mole.
And it's taking a toll. I was reading this report by Vectra AI. Apparently, security teams, the people in those security operations centers or SOCs, they're facing something called alert fatigue.
Alert fatigue.
Yeah, basically they're getting bombarded with so many alerts, so many notifications, many of them false alarms, that it becomes almost impossible to prioritize and respond effectively to real threats.
So like crying wolf too many times, nobody believes it when there's a real danger.
Exactly. And it highlights a huge challenge in cybersecurity right now. Finding that balance between automation, having systems that can detect and flag potential threats, and human oversight. Having skilled people who can then analyze those threats and determine what's real and what's not. We need tools that can filter out the noise, but we also need people who can make sense of the signal.
It's a delicate balance, a lot to think about. But hey, it's not all doom and gloom, right? There's some positive things happening, too. Didn't you say there was some big international effort to combat ransomware?
Right. There was a summit recently for the Counter-Ransomware Initiative. They're trying to bring together governments and organizations from around the world to figure out a more coordinated approach to tackling this thing.
Okay, so what came out of it? Any big takeaways?
Well, one of the main focuses was on strengthening defenses and intelligence sharing.
Which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
The more information we can share about these attacks, the better equipped we are to stop them.
Exactly. Like, the more we know about the tactics being used, the groups behind these attacks, the vulnerabilities they're exploiting, the better chance we have of staying ahead of the curve.
Forewarned is forearmed, as they say. But what about the people who have already been hit by ransomware? Is there any hope of getting their data back?
That's where things get really tricky. And honestly, it's a conversation that deserves its own deep dive.
So we're talking about international cooperation, intelligence sharing. Sounds promising, but let's get real for a second. What does all this mean for the average person? Like, if you get hit with ransomware, what are you supposed to do?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And it's tough. There's no easy answer. One thing they stressed at that Counter-Ransomware Initiative Summit was the importance of, well, trying to reduce those ransomware payments.
Makes sense, in theory. But if your data is held hostage, it's got to be tempting to just pay up and get it over with.
Oh, totally. It's a terrible situation to be in. But the thing is, paying the ransom, it often just leads to more attacks. It's like you're rewarding the bad guys, right? Encouraging more of the same behavior.
So it's a lose-lose situation.
Pretty much. And that's why prevention is so crucial. Strong passwords, the multi-factor authentication we talked about, being careful about those phishing emails, all that stuff can really make a difference.
Be proactive, not reactive, right? But let's say the worst happens, you get hit with ransomware. What should your first steps be?
First thing, don't panic. Easier said than done, I know. But you got to try to stay calm and gather as much information as you can about the attack. Like, what kind of ransomware is it? What data's been affected? And then report it. Contact the authorities.
Even if you're like resigned to never seeing your data again, you should still report it.
Absolutely. Every report helps build a more accurate picture of what's going on out there. It gives law enforcement agencies more data to work with, helps them track these groups, develop strategies. And speaking of data, that's another area where we need to improve: incident reporting. Right now, so many attacks go unreported. It's like trying to fight a battle in the dark.
Right, because if nobody knows about it, how can they do anything about it?
Exactly. The more information we have, the better equipped we are to defend ourselves.
Knowledge is power, as they say.
Yeah.
Well, this has been quite a deep dive, eye-opening, for sure. A little scary, to be honest. But as we're wrapping up here, is there one, like, overarching takeaway you would leave our listeners with?
I think the most important thing is awareness. You don't have to be a tech whiz. Just be mindful of your digital footprint. Use strong passwords, unique passwords for each account. Turn on that two-factor authentication whenever you can, and be careful about what you click on. Oh, and keep your software updated. Those updates, they're not just about new features. They often contain important security patches.
It's about taking those small steps, but consistently.
Exactly. It all adds up.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the wild world of cybersecurity. Remember, stay vigilant, stay informed, and until next time, stay safe out there.